Let's first check how the old code is. It looks pretty black and white with nothing catchy. We'll first start with designing the main screen, which has the send and receive button. Another thing to note is we'll be needing the latest KivyMD because I have made some changes personally to the master branch, which includes multiple file selection options. So to install that, you'll be using pip install and the GitHub master zip link. Let's check if it works. And yeah, it works. Now to start with, I'll keep the main box layout as horizontal to have the buttons side by side. And I'll change the flat button to MD rectangle flat button. Uh, They have a border and we can fill the border with some colors. First, let's increase the width of those buttons. I'll be a size of 0.4, but it doesn't mean anything for now. As I said, if even if you expand the window, the size won't be exactly 0.4 percentage. Let's give some spacing so it looks good. And for a final touch, we'll also add some padding. Another thing to notice, we'll be having these buttons at the top, so it looks good. You should have the sizen as none to position it correctly at the top. Now I'm going to use another box layout which will have a vertical orientation. And this will contain a MD label that says DataShare, just the name of the app. We'll give it a font style of H3 and we'll move this box layout inside the vertical box layout. And let's see how it looks like. So yeah, this head should be capped. It takes up all of the space. We'll try to reduce the space of the label. Okay, now fine. Now again we'll have to move this whole bunch into the top. I was a bit confused, so I tried different method, but none of them worked out. But finally, I came back to my consciousness and setting a size in phi with none was correct. I brought it a little down so that the data share text is visible correctly. I don't know what's the problem is with MD label. It doesn't suit the positioning correctly. And with this, it looks a bit good. Now we'll add some padding for the buttons so it looks a bit more cool. And with the padding, it looks good. And for the button colors, I'll visit the document, and there are text color and BG color. So I'll use BG color and give it primary light. And for the receive, I'll copy paste the code and change it to dark. And then I'll give a dark text color for it to contrast with the background and also the button color. Searching for it, it is the opposite BG dark. It will look white in dark background and black in light background. And that, let's also change the style of this MD label containing the root IP, and also align it to center. It looks a little more materialistic. It looks good. And then we'll move to send. The first thing you'll notice when you open send is that this thing is crashed off. It's with the new update or the master branch. It has changes that aren't totally compatible with the previous version or the stable version. So we'll need to look at its source code to check how they're padding it correctly. Searching through the source code, I found out this Kivy, and I just copy pasted it, and yeah, okay, that's fine. I'll decrease the height and it's fine. It looks good. I'll also position the select file button to center so that it looks good, because there is no other content in that whole page. I'll also change it to MD raise button so that it looks a little elevated, and also give an elevation of 10. Now it looks exactly like I wanted. This clears off the UI part for now. And to continue, we'll be doing the multi-file selection and sending multiple files. Now we have a send file that sends a single file. With my update, you can use multi-select is equal to true to choose multiple files. And while choosing multiple files, it just highlights them. Then you can use the tick to select those files. So the first thing to implement is that is a function send file sends one file. and it opens and closes the socket on that time itself. But for multiple files, we'll be needing a longer socket connection, which to maintain inside the existing class is a bit difficult. So I'll be making a new class sender with some functions so that I'll have a static connection which I can connect to with the class. So in the init method, I'll be receiving the address, and I'll also have a connect method which will collect and return the socket, a disconnect method which will disconnect the socket. I'll also do some naming checks so that it matches for what you're doing. We'll changing paths to paths. For now, I'll have a for loop to iterate through all the paths. I will use a pathlib path object so that I can get multiple values from the same object. Which is file name, file size, etc. I'll comment the necessary code for now so that I'll get an idea when implementing the same for multiple files. So while we receive the receiver IP, let's also connect it to the receiver so that if it fails at the start, we can let the sender know that the connection failed. Else, in the current implementation method, the sender needs to choose a file to start to actually start the connection, which in case he selects a lot of files may be a waste of time too. To test this, I'll have to open two instances of this app. I'll do that. I'll have them side by side and check whether it works. And it works. And I'll also need to send a file name. So to send a file name, we should send and receive the exact number of bytes so that there are no other buffered bytes which may take up space in some other variable. So to do that, we'll send the file name size first. But if you check this the length of each string differs. For example, this len hello and len hello w, each thing differs. For that, we'll use struct, inbuilt Python module. And if we use the len with struct and pack it as an integer, and then take out the length of that, then we'll get the same bytes, same number of bytes for every length of the string. Or for every integer, we'll get the same bytes as it packs them into integer, bytes of integer. So it will be 8 for integer. We'll use a separate function in the class to convert the integer, and we'll call it here. We'll do the same for receiver. We'll have an address as 0.0.0.0 and port as 5001, socket as none. We won't need a init method because there are no variables to be passed down to this class. And I'll choose a listen method. So a receiver will listen to connections from the sender. Listen for will be doing most of the stuff as same as the sender and the previous time. If you notice, this time we have used socket.sock stream instead of dggram because we'll be sending stream files, not datagram files. We'll be using TCP, not UDP. I'll return the socket after accepting it. And we know after accepting, we'll get two variables. One is the connection and the other is address. I'll comment out the code to have a reference. Continue the same thing, create object for receiver, get the socket from the receiver class, and as a first step, receive the file name size. Now we can use the socket and receive 8 bytes exactly. And we won't have any problems in the future too. Now we can send the file name. Encode it. And also we'll be receiving bytes here. So we'll just convert them back into int and receive file name. So we'll be having the exact integer in the file name size, and we'll receive the exact number of bytes as the file name. Now we'll be sending the file size so that we can ensure the same with file. We'll be sending once, for example, if we send a file, we'll be receiving the exact number of bytes that is equal to the file size. So and file size, the same. We'll use the same for file size and convert it into integer. And finally, we'll send the file. We'll open the file we want to read and we'll use sockets send file method now. It'll send the whole file and return us the number of bytes it has sent. So it's a simple thing rather than using the whole thing we used previously. And finally, we'll disconnect the socket. Now, as we have looped it multiple times, we also need to know how many times or how many files we should be receiving. To do that, I'll be sending the number of files to. I'll convert the length of paths and send it. And I'll receive the number of files and convert it back into integer. Now I can loop the same number of times in both the send and receive methods. As most of the work is done, I'll remove the comment and move the existing code into the loop. And to receive the file, we'll need a small algorithm. So first we'll need a buffer size that will tell the connection to receive only the size specified by the buffer size. We'll have a receive size, that is the size of the file which we have received till now. We'll be keeping on incrementing it, and then we'll open the file as writable binary, and with the while loop we'll receive the packet as buffer size. No, if the file size is less than buffer size, then we'll have the file size as buffer size, so that we won't have any problems with smaller files. And then we'll write the packet to the file and increment the receive size with the buffer size. I will also calculate the delta or file size minus receive size to know how much is left. And if delta is less than the buffer size, then we'll keep buffer size as delta. Else, buffer size is the same old 4096. And if receive size equals file size or buffer size equals 0, then we'll break the loop. With this, we can ensure that we receive the exact number of bytes for that file. I'll just print some debugging codes and finally close the connection. To test it, I'm going to open 2 instances of those app and send and receive from one another. So this was the error we received previous time, which states that directory received as a directory. We will use the pathlib method to create a directory received in case there's error with that. And it says so get head. Okay, so it is not socket, but it is sender, and we see that we have received the files with bytes name. So we have to decode the bytes to file name and restart the testing. And yes, we have received all the files intact.